So the caption is "The potato heads in Brazil," and the sign says "Danger, vegetarian piranha." Now, one thing that you do find in angiosperms, you do find it in gymnosperms to some extent also, but for angiosperms especially, the idea of storage structures, like potatoes, bulbs that I talked about tulip bulbs. It's a lot of structures where starches get stored to be used later. We talked about that when we first started talking about plants, because angiosperms in temperate zones need to regenerate. Either they regenerate the whole plant the next time the warmth comes around, or they regenerate the leaves on the trees. And they need storage, energy, and carbohydrates in order to be able to do that. So here's a picture of germination. And what's supplying the carbohydrates is inside the seed. And in this case, it's inside cotyledons. There's two of them, which makes this a dicot, is that one subgroup of the plants uses one of the polar bodies as what's called an endosperm, and will actually generate a seed that is two pieces. Is that they both supply food to the growing plant, but there's, I don't know if there's twice as much food. It's just a different way of doing it. If you've ever, shelled a peanut and the peanut comes apart into two pieces, it's two cotyledons, and peanuts are dicots. So you're going to need to write this stuff down. Because believe me, I'm going to ask you for the list. But I'd rather have this up here to show it to you than write it down myself. So as we go through, we've got the monocots and the dicots. Now, why are they different? I don't think anybody can, I've never seen anybody attempt to explain that, and I don't read a tremendous amount of plant research, but it just seems like it's a bizarre set of differences between two major groups within the angiosperms. But the name comes from the cotyledon. Is that monocots have one cotyledon, dicots have two cotyledons, two-part seeds. Now, for me, the easiest way to remember is to, I'm sorry, I'm about to sneeze, is to think of corn as a typical monocot. If you're familiar with corn plants, or at least ears of corn, that could be useful. And typical dicot, I tend to think of maple trees. But that helps a little bit. When you look at the leaves, think of the leaves around a corn cob as you shuck corn cobs, is that the leaves have these long streaks in them. Those are the veins, the vascular tubes in the leaves. And corn is a grass. If you look at the leaves on the corn stalk itself, they also have long parallel veins. In dicots, there's a central vein, or sometimes a couple, and then there's little veins that branch off of that. So they have branching veins. This says usually, you're getting into big groups, there's going to be exceptions. Now, how do the vascular bundles come up through the stems? In dicots, they're arranged in a ring. And so a lot of dicot stems, you cut the stem through and the inside is hollow. That's kind of a remnant of the fact that the important stuff is in a ring. And of course, tree rings are generated this same way as well. In monocots, the bundles are just kind of scattered through the stems. So the stems are fairly filled. I'm not going to say solid because they're not necessarily solid. And this is something that you see microscopically. If you break the stem, chances are you won't be able to see the bundles. But it is a telltale sign. Now, something that's not here, I'm going to add this to the list, is that these vascular bundles are in a ring in the monocot root. In the dicot root, they're in the middle. There's a little packet of vascular bundles in the middle of a dicot root. Whereas when these get into the root of a monocot, they form a ring. So why there's a ring in the bottom of one and a ring in the top of the other, your guess is as good as mine. When you are looking at flowers, here's another mysterious thing. The parts, so the petals, the anthers, the ovules inside the ovaries, there's all sorts of different parts to a flower. And in the monocots, the number is divisible by 3. So 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. In the dicots, they're divisible by 4 or 5. So of course, if you find one and it's got 12, that doesn't tell you much because that's divisible by 3 and by 4. If you find 15, it's divisible by 3 and by 5. But for things that only have a few, like 6 or 5, then it is a fairly telltale differentiation between the monocots and the dicots. The roots are laid out differently. Is that typically for a dicot, there's big roots with a lot of little roots growing off of them. Not necessarily just one big root. Dicots, very often the trees, and you'll see this, is you'll see these big roots coming out from the bottom of a tree, but if you start digging in the ground like 10 feet away, you hit a bunch of little roots. The big roots don't go very far, and what comes off of them are much smaller branch roots. And that's what you're seeing here. Whereas in a monocot, if you've ever pulled grass up by the roots, you see this. It's all kind of spidery and feathery. You know, lots and lots and lots of little bitty roots. It's what's called the fibrous root system. So there's some very, very major differences that don't always work. It's biology. There's exceptions. That's why a bunch of these things say usually. But typically, you can look at an angiosperm, and depending on what parts you've got, because keep in mind, you're looking at an angiosperm, you're not necessarily going to have flowers that you can see. You're probably going to have leaves. You won't be able to see the stems microscopically. You may or may not have access to the roots. You may not have access to the seeds. So your way to tell what you're looking at is going to vary from plant to plant and circumstance to circumstance. I thought of something in the middle of that. Now it's gone from my brain. Oh, okay. Woody. We talked about this with the gymnosperms, this kind of brown bark and ring setup inside is a woody stem. In angiosperms, those are characteristic of dicots. So trees that are angiosperms that have these other features are going to be dicots. And this is why the xylem is in a ring, and the phloem is actually in a ring underneath on the underside of the bark. And you have these big roots and these little roots. But if you're looking at a tree and it's not a conifer, it's not a gymnosperm, then it's going to be a dicot. Sorry, I thought for a second I had a Mike Pence moment. It looked like I had something on my hair. Okay, I was going to try to squeeze this into the angiosperm video, and then I realized I'd already gone a half an hour, so I didn't have a tremendous amount of extra stuff to put on there, but we'd be almost to 40 minutes now if we had kept it at one big video. So that does it for chapter 8. Then we're going to go, chapter 9 is going to be relatively brief. It's going to be on fungi or funguses, fungi, fungi, however you want to pronounce them and however you want to do the plural. And so that'll be on the next video.